we're going to move on now to our next speaker. He is a he has been a criminologist, a social entrepreneur, a former policeman, a doctor who got his PhD in 2012. I just think there's nothing he can't do. He seems to be able to do it all. We'll find out. So his talk is called Coaching Young People, Challenges and Successes, and his name is Daniel Marshall. Let's welcome him to the stage.
Yeah. A long, long time ago, I was 16 years old. I was leaving school and I had three options in front of me. I could continue my education, the easy option, do my A-levels, follow my friends. I could do an engineering apprenticeship, or I could join the police cadets. I chose to do the mechanical engineering apprenticeship. Probably as a 16-year-old, I was quite motivated by money and finance. I'd just finished school, I'd worked part-time in a sports shop, I had no money, I wanted a bit of money, and engineering presented that. It also presented an opportunity for me to enhance my education, enhance my skills, and earn a bit of money. And I was probably also sold on the dream I was being told by a lot of the engineering guys, this is a solid foundation for the rest of your life, something you can do forever. So I did that. The apprenticeship was 4.5 years long, and it wasn't long into that time that I realised, I don't want to do this. This is not for me. I was ready to quit and walk away. I was surrounded by good people who supported me, listened to me, family, friends, colleagues, mentors and coaches at the time. So I decided to complete the apprenticeship and then do whatever it was I wanted to go on and do with my life. So I did that. On completion, I joined the police. I also enrolled on a degree in criminology and psychology. Enrolling on the degree was a bit of a backup because I feared, at 21 years of age at the time, I feared that if it didn't work out in the police and I didn't like it, my only fallback was that horrible engineering stuff that I was doing. It was also part of my commitment to lifelong learning and education, which is something I still maintain today, and I will till my dying day. As a police officer, I met a young lad named Jack. Jack was 13 years old. It would be the first of many meetings with him over the following years. Jack was a persistent young offender. Looking over his offence history and his case records revealed that Jack was committing shoplifting, lots of shoplifting, large chain supermarkets. Every single individual shoplift was for under the value of £5. It's quite low level offender, but lots of it. He was well used to the process. He'd committed so many offences. He'd served many short-term custodial sentences. He was so young. I decided to ask Jack, why? Why are you committing these offences? And he looked at me and he said, I don't know what else to do. I don't know who else to turn to for help and support. And what transpired was a typical day for Jack was to leave his house at around 8 o'clock in the morning. His mother would assume he was going off to school. He wasn't. He was just hanging around, wandering around the town centre of the town that he lived in. He wasn't allowed back into his house until around 7 p.m. on an evening when his mother let him back in the house. So for around 11 hours a day on a typical day, he was just on his own. He didn't know his father. Jack's story, along with other experiences I had at that time, had a real profound effect on me. 6 years after joining the police, I left. And I left to pursue a PhD in criminology. And that PhD focused on the work of youth justice workers and professionals on the work they do with young offenders, what they do, why they do it, and how they do it. Some of the findings from that research and other experiences I'd had previously and I was having at that time showed that many young offenders in particular had 8, 9 or 10 professionals, practitioners working with them at any one time. This is people from the youth services, the police, probation, social services, accommodation, education, employment, charities, social enterprises, all working with this young person at the same time. people tended to be quite confused by that. And all of those professionals, not one of them really seemed to be paying any specific attention to the young human being that they were working with. Rather, there was a focus on processing and a pressure, I should say, organizational pressures on them to process these young people, to meet targets, organizational targets, and to move them on as quickly as possible. And it was sad to see that. What I should point out and highlight is that there is lots of positive, fantastic work going on by individuals, organizations, professionals, all sorts of people around the country. But there are ultimately lots of issues. Another example is a young lad named Ben, who I met around that time. He was 17 years old. Ben had a mentor. He was living independently for the first time, and when his mentor visited Ben for the first time, he found in his kitchen cupboards 10 loaves of mouldy bread. 10. He approached Ben and he said, "What's up with all this mouldy bread?" Ben's response, "Oh, I did my big shop last week. I won't have to buy bread for months." Despite being known to the youth services, despite being known to criminal justice agencies for several years, Ben had just not picked up that critical skill that many of us take for granted. Bread will last a week if you're lucky. And amongst the skills, he had a mentor who was helping him with that process. And if we add to all this, 75% of young offenders in custody will re-offend within a year of release. And that has recently increased. It's not getting better, that's recently increased. Over 3/4 of our young people in this country who are in custody right now will re-offend within a year of release. Something is just not working. These experiences contributed to me starting a charity working with young offenders in custody. And rather than providing mentors, we provided coaches, trained coaches who would go into custody and work with young people one-to-one, asking powerful questions, listening to the young people, all led by the young person. And instrumental to our development of that charity at the time, providing coaches, training, access to resources, and a wider fantastic community, most of whom are sat in this room, was the MOE Foundation. And I was introduced to Darren at the time. I got the shiny blue certificate, Natalie, qualified as a coach, and I've been involved in the Dream Factory and things since, which has been fantastic. So I'm very grateful to that, and that's one of the main reasons I'm standing here today. Through that charity, we truly believed that young people would become truly empowered with this one-to-one coaching approach. But there were many, many challenges. And among the challenges, one of the critical challenges was that the coaches were coming in cold. Not because it was freezing on the outskirts of London or Kent and the places we were working, but more so that they didn't have an existing relationship with the young person. They had no experience or knowledge of the young person, the young offender who was sitting in front of them in custody. And this is something we know is necessary for work with young people, especially young offenders who work in custody, who are in custody. You need that existing relationship. And adding to that list of 8, 9, 10 professionals I mentioned earlier, there was a danger that we were just adding another person onto the end of that. So we're just adding the 10th or 11th person onto the end of this young person who's confused. And that increases the risk of rejection for these young people. We've heard a lot this morning about rejection of young people feeling rejected. Young offenders in custody have suffered lots of rejection in their lives. And if the coach, it doesn't work out and the coach walks away, it's potentially just another form of rejection for that young person. There's another person who doesn't want to work with me, another organisation who doesn't want to work with me, another uniform that I don't want to see. So, I started 81 Dots. 81 Dots is an organisation which works with youth service practitioners and upskills them using a coaching skills approach. These practitioners are best placed to deliver a coaching-focused approach with young people, especially young offenders, but not just young offenders. A lot of these practitioners are working, professionals and working with a range of young people who are homeless, young people not in education, training, and employment, young people who are in care. There's a whole range. So coaching then, through this approach, would become more accessible. In the first 2 years working with the one-to-one approach of the charity, we reached 8 young offenders. And in the first 2 years with a practitioner-focused approach of 81 Dots, we reached over 1,000 young people. Not just offenders, people. Coaching can be a very powerful addition to a practitioner's toolkit. Lots of these youth practitioners, they have a multitude of experience and skills that many of us do not. Adding coaching in there, a coaching filter if you like, they've already got maybe mentoring skills, counselling skills, cognitive behavioural therapy skills, multi-systemic therapy skills, restorative justice skills, and so on and so on. If we can add a filter in there with coaching skills, they can dip into that, use their professional judgment when necessary, working with the young people who they see on a daily basis. Among the success stories was a young lad, all young lads unfortunately, in these examples, but a young lad named Sean. And Sean was not in education, training and employment, 17 years old, and he'd been on to the youth services for around 2 years. He was under pressure to get a job or to go in education, much like a 16-year-old me I described at the beginning. The services were pressuring him, his family were pressuring him. He didn't want to do it, he didn't want to engage. His caseworker decided to use a coaching approach, having gone through our training process, and in her words was amazed to see that within 2 weeks of this approach, Sean had left his house for the first time in a long time and got himself a job, a volunteering position with a local charity, just 2 days a week, but it's what Sean wanted to do. It wasn't the job everyone wanted him to get, it wasn't the education program that everyone said he should be doing, but he was doing what he wanted to do. And those coaching tools provided a platform for Sean to do what he wanted to do, led and driven by him. He was actually being listened to. Now I could stand here all day with successes, but we have to be cautious, and I'm not standing here saying this is a one-fits-all approach, one-size-fits-all approach. It's not. Coaching is not for everybody. It won't work with everybody. We can help Ben, we can help Jack, we can help Sean, but there's many young people out there who need a multitude of support and needs that need to be met through other means, which is why the practitioners are in the best position, I believe, to deliver this coaching-focused approach. We need to listen to our young people, and we need to ensure the work we do with young people is truly child-centered. We need to hear their voices, and we need to support the practitioners and the professionals who work tirelessly under pressure with these young people throughout the country and around the world. And this is what we strive to do through the 81 Dots approach. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. I was kind of at the very beginning, I was being quite emotional during what you were saying. Thank you. I'm sure other people will probably be quite emotional as well. And one of the things which really struck me is how you described, you said people, not just offenders, and I'm sure you come across so many young people who have been labelled and they're sort of forgotten about as being just young individuals. How do you keep your head in all of this? How do you ensure that you don't sort of lose yourself and get over emotional in all of this as well?
Very difficult. It's heartbreaking really sometimes to see the way that we, and the collective we, the whole country really as a society, we treat young people. As I said, it's heartbreaking to see. And I feel, Natalie summed it perfectly when she said, if you don't go out and try and make a difference, who is going to try and make a difference? I'm not the only person in the world who can do this. I haven't invented this. There's lots of people doing it. It's a fantastic group of people here, the speakers and others in the room who are doing fantastic things. So my drive and for me and the motivation is just that if I don't do it, someone else may not. I know other people aren't, but it's difficult. Just got to keep powering on for you. I was in person once, and I hope that came through a little bit. It was a long time ago, but it's important to support young people. Without that support, I wouldn't have done the things I've done, and who knows, I won't be standing here right now, for sure.
Is this approach met with much resistance from the practitioners that are already in place?
It's a mixed bag. It's difficult. Who am I? I mean, some people have addressed this earlier, like, who am I to tell you what to do? Who am I to tell you this is right? How do we know this is right? But I think I approach it with the practitioners. That's why we prefer the upskilling approach. They have lots of experience and skills. We're not going in there telling them, you don't have this, you need it. It's enhancing what they've already got. And it is met with resistance, but I've found those that meet it with the most resistance are those that are actually impacting the most change using the coaching approach, has been my experience. So resistance is good, sometimes.
Within reason. Do you have any questions from the floor? Great.
Cheers, Daniel. Hold that a bit further away. The difference between coaching and mentoring is just something that's quite close to my own heart. Just wondered if you could expand on what you found worked so well with a coaching approach as opposed to a more mentor approach, which you talked about at the start. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Like you said, it's a very fine line. It's a fine line between being a coach and being a mentor, and we can define it. There's not really any given definition for both. But what we've found with the coaching, especially with the youth practitioners, is just the style of questioning they've used, rather than being directive. And rather than being driven by the organisational policy and this is what we're told we have to achieve with these young people, instead I'm going to resist that as a professional. I'm going to ask this young person, well, what does success look like to you? What does the job that you want a job? What does that look like? And the coaching style questions that you and I, and many of us know. Whereas with mentoring, I think it is much more driven. Mentoring is very powerful. I'm not saying you shouldn't use mentoring, of course, but rather than imparting their skills and organisational sort of values onto the young people, they tend to be taking a standoff approach and letting them asking more powerful questions. And does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think the biggest challenge has been the organisational values versus the individual values, and the young person gets lost in all of that. We've managed to forge, in a few teams at least, that the practitioners will step aside for a second, take their organisational hat off and step into the coaching approach.
Thank you so much. If you've got further questions for Daniel, he'll be around, so feel free to have a chat with him. So thank you so much.
Thank you.